showing up for the live program.
Sifu Dwight.
I mean, look, man. I know you can drive Corvettes at high speed.
I bet I can.
You can disarm, you know, multiple attackers in your fuselage.
Like this.
Your fuselage training for sky marshals, and you know, you got all kind of rigs, holsters and stuff, and you cannot connect an iPhone.
Well, it says I'm connected, no?
Well, yeah, but it took you like 2 minutes.
Well, I was trying to do it off my laptop, but and then every time I opened the notification when you sent it,
right,
it would take me to the broadcast like as if I was normally watching it, but it didn't give me any option to join in from there.
No, it doesn't. It won't. Not yet. I mean, at some point, you know, we'll be so famous on Facebook that they'll actually let us go from iPhone to laptop or something. But right now, it just works phone to phone.
I thought you're already that famous.
No, not yet. How are you?
You're the JKD Rebel. You're the JKD Rebel.
Yeah, but maybe without a cause.
Yeah, well, that makes more than one of us. You know what I mean?
So listen, so for everybody who does not know, because a little while ago, you actually posted on your Facebook page a photograph of the two of us at the Stephen Oliver Dan Kennedy event. This was
Colorado.
Yeah, this was 12 years ago. So
yeah.
That's where, for everybody who's watching, that's where Sifu Nik and I met at a marketing event, a business event. So I wanted to start with that. Why were you at a business event as a martial artist?
Multiple reasons. One, I was teaching at two other academies that were not mine at the time, and that gentleman also wanted me to come along because I was actually running both of those academies for him. And so I needed to understand a little bit more prowess for it. That was kind of the face value reasoning for it.
Yeah.
The real reasoning for me to be there was because I knew at some point that I wanted to have my own academies. And the best way to learn about other academies, as far as the ones that are successful, is to pay attention to the things that their behaviors are doing. And so I wanted to hear from you know, other people who are teaching, other people who owned academies, some of them multiple academies. You know, at that time, I mean, you're talking, man, I was in my early 20s in those days, right? So I was still kind of young to the martial arts business side of things. And so I really wanted to go and learn from as much people as I could and network and see what this whole martial arts business retreat thing looked like.
Right.
Plus, I got to hang out with you, and you were like the only other JKD guy there. It was a whole bunch of Taekwondo people and us.
I know.
You know,
and, you know, to this day, let's see, I can count on one hand JKD people that showed up at the same marketing events that I went to. Me, you, Nick Sakulas.
Yeah,
that's pretty
much
it.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it. You know, then there was a time when, I don't know if you ever went to any of the Lloyd Irving events, but those were, I would say, most of the people that went to Lloyd's events were like MMA guys or BJJ guys or whatever, more so than JKD guys. So did you join Oliver's program yourself?
No, I tend to not join people's cults.
Okay, so obviously you didn't join. You didn't join the Kennedy's program.
I don't want to be so blunt about it, but it kind of is what it is, you know. And so, like, if I could be frank with you, which I know I can be because we've known each other for so long, and that's the way we've always communicated, was you know, many of the speakers that came to this thing, as in a business sense, I would run circles around them.
Right.
So what are you charging me for?
Yeah, because that's actually something that I wanted to touch on with you, because both when it comes to business and also when it comes to Jeet Kune, my sense is that you came in knowing stuff already, not right, you know, as opposed to somebody like me. When I came into JKD, I just had movie stuff and book stuff, right, from about Bruce Lee, and I wanted to meet and train under Dan Inosanto. but I get the sense that you came in for different reasons and from a different direction. Am I right?
Came into JKD or came into the business aspect?
Both of them.
Yeah. Yes and yes.
Okay.
I guess if I kind of broke this down, well, maybe it's fair just to give the audience just a quick 30,000-foot view of where I come from and into the JKD world, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I got into the business aspect of things and relate to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, when I came into, like most people, I started off the martial arts side of things as a youngster, right? Doing the taekwondos and the Shotokan karates and that kind of thing. In my adolescent years, my family moved from one town to another, and I lost out on the school that I was training at, and so which was an Aikido school at the time. And I was looking around, and through a friend of a friend of a friend, I learned about this guy who was teaching martial arts from his backyard, but nobody knew what the heck it was. And so I asked if I could ride along, and I went to go train with him, or I went to go observe.
Yeah.
And the guy was teaching Southern Praying Mantis and Northern White Crane Gung Fu. And so I signed on because it was like the closest thing I could find, and I had a ride, you know. And so so I signed on and did that for a couple of years, and I actually really enjoyed the historical and the cultural values that it taught me. It's something that definitely made an impact.
Yeah.
But it wasn't what I was looking for what my martial arts should do. In the 80s, 90s, all the way from the 60s all the way up to the 90s, Chicagoland itself, which is where I grew up, right, Chicago, had a very robust boxing scene, like every corner. And so in the 90s, that changed because of popularity of MMA. And so you started to see boxing gyms start to bring in kickboxing programs. So now I signed on for one of those, and I did that for a couple of years, and I loved it, loved it. Suddenly, Kismet kicks in, and I've always had, like, for my 16th birthday, a friend of mine gave me the Tao of Jeet Kune, right? We all knew who Bruce Lee was from the silver screen, but like I didn't know anything about JKD in specific, you know? I just knew Bruce Lee had his own thing.
Yeah.
And so I had this book, and it was an abomination. It's dog-eared, it's highlighted. I got notes on the side, you know what I mean? I mean, the glue for the binding is like all kinds of like falling apart many moons ago. I still have it somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I used to read this thing, but when I read the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, I realized something. Unless somebody guides me through this, it doesn't do me any good. I could pick up a little bit here and there,
right,
but not really understand JKD.
Okay.
And so, at least for me, and maybe I'm just slow that way, and that could be. And so I started looking around for JKD.
Let me
go ahead.
I apologize if I interject it. You're not slow. You know, because in the old days, people used to refer to Jeet Kune Do like in reference to black belts and other systems. Jeet Kune Do was university level. You can't do university stuff on your own. So the Tao is university level.
I say that now, but I didn't know that then.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Now, in hindsight, I still say JKD is very PhD level is the term that I use, which is, you know, in line with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so I had this book, and then a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend kicks in, and somehow this flyer makes its way over to me. Okay, this is 1997. Makes its way over to me, and so my buddy hands it to me, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you remember Carl? Carl gave it to me, but he picked it up from Chris. And remember Chris? You never met Chris, and he picked it up from." And so it like made its way over to me somehow.
Right.
And so, and I want the audience to remember this phrase. Here's what the flyer said. It said, "Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do for street fighting, as taught to the Navy SEALs." Okay. Remember that phrase. We'll come back to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do for street fighting, as taught to the Navy SEALs. And so I went to this seminar. It was Sifu Nik. It was his last trip into Chicago. It was hosted by a guy named Mike Van Beek, which I'm friends with Mike Van Beek now. And so I went to this thing, and I was blown away with the prowess of combative ability that this guy had. You know, he was charismatic, he was fun, he told good stories, but he could move. And I never saw something like that, you know, and I was just like, wow, okay. So a week later, I have every single VHS from Paul Vunak ever made, okay? Some of you guys are probably too young to understand what VHS is.
Yeah.
It's about the size of a Prius. We used to put it in this thing, and the thing you used to, okay, anyways. And so I ultimately started becoming a student of his, and I found a couple instructors under him in Chicagoland that I started training with.
Yep.
Moved again, and I lived in Rockford, Illinois, and I was really, really close to Pete Hetrick. You know Pete.
Yes.
Yeah. And so he was in just over the border, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Rockford is just south of the border. And so when I was training at these schools on the weekends, I used to go up by him and train with him. And so that's what introduced me into JKD. And so like I was with the PFS family till about 2007. I met Professor Roy Harris, which I introduced you to online. I fell in love with the way he taught because he's such a humble guy. He doesn't look like a fighter. Right. Then you watch him move and you're like, oh my God, this is dope, you know, like, you know, and so yeah, he's really good. And so he comes over to me at his academy in San Diego and he hands a training blade, a training sword over, and he says, have you ever heard of Calis Illustrissimo? I said, Calicissimo, what's that? and he's like, and so he's like, well, you move the stick and you move the blade, right? I said, yes, sir. And he's like, well, let me see what you got. So here I am doing carenza. I'm doing, you know, abanicos, retics, redondos, floretes. I'm putting this all together. And he's got this look on his face, like, it wasn't that he disapproved. It was almost nauseating, you know? And so I was just like, okay. So he starts to teach me this thing called the punch cut, what he calls the punch cut. And the directness of it, and he related to JKD terms about simplicity and directness and that kind of stuff. I'm like, okay. I don't fully understand it yet, but there's something to this thing. Right. And so him and I developed a very fruitful relationship over the years. I started bringing him out to Chicago a couple times a year. I believe my group is his highest ranked JKD group that's active. I believe. I could be corrected on that. So we developed a very robust relationship. He's a mentor to me in many ways, off the mats and outside of martial arts by far. Yeah. And so along the way, you know, I started to train more and more with the Guru Dan Inosanto. I've trained with Ron Balicki, Guru Rick Fay. You know, I tried to get, you know, Eric Paulson, as many people as I can. I would try to understand something from them. And so that never changed. And then, you know, JKD was really kind of like this segue for me. It brought me to Jiu-Jitsu. It brought me to Savate. It brought me to Panatuk and Silat. It brought me to so many different places, like you were talking about earlier today, about how to capture the essence of something. Yeah. And so some of those things stayed with me and some of those didn't. And so, you know, 2007, I opened my own academy, my first one. I was actually teaching at a house, which I converted part of my house into an academy. Oh, that must have been fun. It was a horrible experience. It really was. It was a bad time in life, right? Because I owned this is the business part of things. I had taken over my father's construction business, and my dad was a custom home builder. In 2005, 2006, inventory, like, you know, your properties that you own were losing value by the thousands every second. And so I had money going out, and I was so burned out of it anyways, you know what I mean? And so I'm like, you know, I got to go back to something I love. So I started teaching martial arts from home, private lessons and private groups and such. That led to me opening, renting space from a gymnastics academy. Gymnastics academy expanded, so I took a part of their second building. Yeah. Eventually, I got tired of being under their control, so I got my finances together, and I opened my first retail space location, and outgrew that within a good couple years, and then opened my fourth location, which would have been my industrial space.
Let me interrupt you again. And for those of you who want to see what Sifu Nik is actually talking about, go to his page on Facebook, because he's put up a couple of excerpts from, what do you call it? The book that you're kind of not working on?
I'm kind of not working on. I thought you'd get a kick out of that, you know?
Oh, I love it. Because it reminds me of the book that I've written that I've kind of not have written. Right?
Yeah. It's well, you understand it. Like, you look, that's some, you know how I actually compiled that book, or at least compiling the book, is I'm going through my journals and just plugging the dots and I'm making pages. It's not something that I'm actually sitting down with a deliberate intention of writing a book. You know what I mean? So it's mostly like it's really a compilation of many of my notes and my personal journal entries as far as the business aspect goes, that I'm trying to rephrase a little bit and just put stuff out there.
My book has an endorsement from Dan Kennedy, and it has a dedication to Dan Inosanto already. And it's just sitting there.
Well, but the dedication's done and the forward's done, right? You know? Yeah, so that's and so that's the way it goes. Look, I run a business. I'm not trying to run a write a book and do a bunch of things, but
Hmm.
I feel compelled these days. So last year I moved down to Dallas, right? Because my S2 strategic defense is taking me in a completely different direction than JKD and Kali.
Yeah.
And so I've had this a lot. I've been substitute teaching with some people, and our community is pretty small, and so we've been, a lot of people call me up and say, well, I'm trying to open a school. How did I do this? Or they get themselves in financial trouble. So I'm really just trying to put content out,
Hmm.
mostly to help them culminate some thought and help them reprioritize how they're going about business in
Right.
efforts that they're successful. I want people successful. I
Yeah.
want JKD gyms to be successful in specific.
Yeah. Let me ask you. Let me ask you about that. What are your what have been your observations thus far, to the approach that JKD people have been using in martial art business? Have you had any observations, and do you have any opinions on what you've seen?
I think some people have sold out, and it reminds me of the days when I was looking for a JKD school and I walked into a place and it said Shotokan JKD.
Wow.
Okay. I think when I say sold out, I don't mean that on a personal thing. People are doing what they have to do to be able to thrive in a pretty competitive industry.
Right.
And so, what I mean by that is like they've kind of diluted themselves. The power of what we do is in its purity. Okay. I don't care if you add other programs and do other things. That's cool, and to have a good variety and a good menu of course offerings at your facility is a plus.
Hmm.
But when you're taking something and calling it something else, I take an issue with, So when you take Shotokan JKD, or you take Israeli JKD or whatever JKD, you know what I mean? It's kind of like you're missing like you're losing out. You're bastardizing it for the rest of us, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so that's one part of it. The other part of that I really find is, you and I do not have, at least JKDers do not have the same platform like many martial arts do. Traditional martial arts always have the kids program, right? I mean, it's household anymore. When you talk about jujitsu, you have big names like Gracie's who are still very active, and they have a lineage of like the grandsons are making videos and
Right.
making these marketing machines, and that kind of Krav Maga is a marketing machine. But JKD doesn't have that. We have a huge name. We have Sifu Bruce Lee, you
Right.
know, and then we have Guru Dan Inosanto right behind it. But that's not mainstream yet. You and I had this conversation the other like a couple weeks ago. Everybody thinks we teach karate,
Yeah.
you know, and so like, oh, you're a karate guy, and it's like, no, I'm a JKD guy. You know what? I can't even have this argument with you anymore. So.
So how do you explain that? How is it, right? Because I made a note. Why did I make a note? Who was I
I
talking
don't know.
to? But in the past 6 months, there have been two Bruce Lee biographies released, right?
Mhm.
Bruce Lee: A Life by Matthew Polk, and I got it in the mail yesterday. Bay Logan's Bruce Lee and I. So in the past 6 months, there have been two new biographies on Bruce Lee, and Joaquin Marcelo in Spain released his new Jeet Kune book. So 40 something years later, they're still writing about him, and there's still books being produced. How come we don't have a marketing machine?
Because when we write these books or read these books, they tend to be done in a historically respectful fashion and not current time.
Ah,
It's become irrelevant, and it's not an irrelevant thing. I mean, if you look at what I do, right? I mean, look, I left teaching JKD and Kali to teach my law enforcement, my corporate stuff,
yeah,
and I got my seminar circuit. I'm all over the globe. I'm working off of JKD. That's my core is JKD.
right,
You know what I mean?
right.
And so, when we refer to JKD, at least when I do it, when I refer to JKD, I don't refer to it in a historic fashion. Because it becomes irrelevant. You and I could talk about Napoleon, right? Well, Napoleon's tactics in today's technology is irrelevant.
Hmm.
I mean, he was a great military leader. Well, I don't care politically, whatever you say about him is fine. But as a military leader, Genghis Khan was a great military leader.
Mm-hmm.
But when we talk about him compared to today's thing, what we see today compared to mixed martial arts, compared to Krav Maga, people write these things in a historic value and not in a current value. And that really bothers me. I would much rather see, actually, you know, I'll kind of let the cat out of the bag. I'm releasing a program later this year about taking JKD and putting it to today's tactics, today's principles.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the big reasons that compelled Sifu Paul Vunak's success in the 80s and 90s was because of what he was doing for people for today,
Right.
or for his day, I should say, you know?
Right.
And so that had an appeal to it.
Yeah. JKD 4th Street,
I mean, what do you think?
as taught to the fields.
Yeah, so I said make a note of that, right?
That, can you?
I feel like that's fairly relevant.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like that's fairly relevant, you know, and you know, there's an interesting thing why I said make note of that particular verbiage is that, you know, so I was 18 years old, 18 years old when I started JKD, right? And so when I saw that flyer, comes down to, for you guys who are business owners or instructors or just trying to get things moving, the messaging behind your marketing pieces makes a big difference.
Right.
When I understood in that phraseology, Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune for street fighting as taught to the Navy SEALs. I knew what Bruce Lee was. I knew what JKD was, kind of. We all know what street fighting is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what Navy SEALs was, so it lost its relevance to me there.
Oh, really?
I was young. Well, in those days, I mean, look, Navy SEAL teams didn't become like Hollywood popular until President Obama talked about it after they went after, you know, Saddam Hussein and Bin Laden.
Yeah,
that's a new thing.
You know what's interesting? When you said that you got your start in 1997, I thought to myself, wow, that's a really long time ago. That's 21 years ago. And then in the back of my mind, I go, yeah, Dwight, you got your start in 83. And I'm like, oh.
Sifu Dwight, there's a reason. So I was talking to Deanna Parson last night via text, or actually by phone call. You probably recall her from Minnesota.
Right now, yeah.
Awesome. Hi, Dee. And so, you know, we were talking, and I told her, I said, you know, when Sifu Dwight speaks, I said, I shut up because in JKD, he's by far senior to me. So when he wants to teach, I'm going to listen. So whatever he's got to say, I'm in, you know? And so, you know, you have to know who your senior guys are, you know what I mean? And so, you know, we pay respect
the same way. That's why, I don't know if I don't think I told you this personally, but when I, in the broadcast, I said, anything that I do, the two people whose opinions matter to me the most are Chris Kent and Cass Magda, right? So when I did my first dialogue episode with Chris, Cass calls me and he goes, Dwight, what the heck? Chris said such and such, and you didn't delve into it. I'm like, okay. So that's why I did a second episode. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I feel about those two guys. Anything that they say, I'm listening. I shut up and I listen. You know?
Yeah, I think that's maybe I sometimes I wonder if that's generational, because I see that type of respect a lot with your generation, and I see it a little less with my generation, and I see even less with the generation that comes behind me, and then so on and so forth. Well, you know, and I think again, relevance, right?
Well, remember, you see, I think that it is definitely generational, because the generation that came after you, that's the mobile phone technology generation.
Yeah, right.
They don't seem to know anything about anything. Not the
they can sure certainly use the phone.
You know, I'm talking about regular people.
They're really good. they're really good at using the phone and getting techie stuff done, right?
No, seriously. I mean, you know that I field questions on Quora, right? I had a guy send me a question. He says to me, is it wrong? This is his words. Is it wrong to take a break from social networks, especially if you're a little tired? That's what
you should have said yes. I would have said yes. Well, why not? I mean, look, you know, if you're going to ask a question like that, I'm going to give you an answer like that, you know?
I mean, come on, is it wrong? I thought this has gone too far, way too far.
And you and I come from generations where spending too much time in front of a TV or on your phone or whatever, that was the negative thing. Now it's a negative thing to be away from that stuff. Yeah, you know, so it's an unfortunate set of circumstances. I think I'm hoping that that'll circle its way around at some point in life. Sifu Dwight?
Yeah, I got you now.
Okay.
Are you
Okay.
still
Yeah. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I thought we were doing fine. I knew this would happen, and I know you're going to give me grief about it.
I'll call you tomorrow. I would never do it in front of the audience.
I'll let
you
him
get a
know.
text message from me later.
You'll give me grief about it tomorrow, right? But I wanted people to be able to see you live, and because if we did this on Zoom and then I posted it, it's better than nothing. But I think that the live interaction brings a quality to what it is that we're doing. And as you were saying, it makes it immediately relevant.
100% correct. And for anybody who's watching, listen, everybody has their flavor of JKD. Okay, I feel very honored to be on here with you guys and with Sifu Dwight. I have a lot of respect for everybody here. Sifu Dwight, big time respect for him. For me to bring value to you, the best thing I could talk to you about is not about JKD, it's about the business aspect of what you're doing. And so if you guys have questions, spell them out, and I'm sure Sifu Dwight can read a few of them out, and I'd be happy to answer those questions as we move along. My history in JKD is pretty interesting, but it's not going to be as interesting, it's not going to be as relevant and valuable as let's talking about your business. Okay, if you have a question on how you get started, I'm here for you. Okay, and so keep that in mind as we move along.
You know what? I can be the intermediary for those guys, because I was quite taken with the stuff that I saw you posting, right? Because what you do actually, and I thought this was really cool, is that you attack it, right? Or you approach it from one of the most important aspects, which actually happens to be one of the aspects that a lot of people avoid, and that's the financing. You see?
Yeah, the finance part actually in the book that I'm not working on, the finance part is a huge part of it, because that's going to be one of the biggest things that we have to overcome when you're starting a new business, right? And so we need to be really keen with what we're doing, or else you're not going to, you need your money to make you money. It has to generate some kind of a result, or else not, you're just throwing it into a barrel of fire.
Right.
For those of you guys who didn't see the post that I made yesterday, I kind of gave like a checklist of things, and I kind of gave the background on how I got there. But I talked to, I was consulting a Jiu-Jitsu and MMA academy in Colorado. This is back in 2017. And the guy was literally going off and buying 2 octagons, a boxing ring, the heavy bag rack, that holds like 16 heavy bags and stuff, and all this fancy equipment. I said, bro, how many students do you have? And he's like, 4. 4? He had 4 students. And I said, who the hell's going to use it? How much money are you putting into that? He's like, well, I took a loan out. And I said, put the money where it needs to work for you, not in the stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Put the money in at least 10 times in that student enrollment before you invest in the cage.
I always liked, I like buying stuff and changing stuff at the academy as we move along, because it re-excites the people that are already in there.
Yeah, the newness of stuff.
Okay? The newness of stuff, right? The fresh car smell, Yeah.
Is the BJJ/MMA market saturated now, or is it still vibrant?
I feel like it's very vibrant. We have new jiu-jitsu academies opening all the time that are still picking up a lot of students. They've done well with entering into the kids programs. They've done well integrating with Muay Thai and wrestling programs as well. There's more and more black belts coming out, and high level grapplers that are coming out that are coaching and opening schools, and I think that's going to be a relevant thing for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more relevant they become, the less relevant the other things become.
Yeah.
So, like traditional arts.
Okay. So if, today on the broadcast, I was talking about, we talked a couple of weeks ago about liberating yourself from classical martial arts. Then we talked about liberating yourself from classical Jeet Kune, right? And now it's just liberate yourself almost from yourself, right? So if 12 years ago, you and I were sitting in the audience at Stephen Oliver's thing, trying to learn from the Taekwondo people, do we try to learn now from the BJJ and MMA people?
Yes and no. I think it depends on what your vision for your academy is and what you're trying to get after.
Mm-hmm.
To get kind of look, I never had a kids program at my academy ever. None of them. I've never had a kids program. Kids programs are huge money makers up front, right? It's not that I don't like kids. I don't like the parents, and so fact.
Do you have kids of your own?
No. I love kids.
Yeah.
It's the parents. They're nagging. Why didn't Johnny get his belt? It's like, because Johnny can't tie his shoe. You know what I mean? And so,
like, what do you make then of JKD schools and JKD people who have brought the belts in along with, or brought the kids programs in along with the belts, and are now doing the whole Jeet Kune belts thing to appease the parents?
On a personal level or on a professional level?
Let's do whichever one you prefer, whichever one you feel is safer for you.
On a professional, well, they're both safe. I'm in Texas. I'm good to go. And so, on a professional level, I understand why they did it. One, they did it because you have to be able to, there has to be some separation of the classes. You can't take somebody who's a different age group or different skill level and bring them in with a different, it just, sometimes those two don't mix.
Right.
And so that's one part of it.
Yeah.
And I honestly feel like if JKD schools continued under Sifu Bruce Lee, at some point, some kind of a ranking system would have had a separation of like beginner, intermediate, advanced, or belt. Or I feel like some of that would have come into place somewhere. You need to have that structure if we were going to have a commercialized academy.
Right.
In those days, it wasn't a commercialized academy. It was like a small group of people in the backyard kind of a thing almost.
Right.
And so, so there was no need for it. And keep in mind, everybody who was training under Sifu Bruce Lee was already a high-level martial artist. He didn't say, I'm going to teach you martial arts. He said, show me your martial arts and I'll teach you how to do it better. It's a pretty cocky thing for a 21-year-old guy to say.
Yeah.
And so, and so there was a whole different approach. That's actually the approach that I kept with, and we could talk about that too. So on a professional level, I get it because you have to separate classes and ages and skill levels. Cool, not a problem. Although I'm not a belt person, but I get that part of it. On a personal level, I take qualm with it because it's so contradictory to what we believe as JKD practitioners and instructors. And you should know better, you know what I mean, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of against it, but you know what? We're all guilty of it. Even in my classes, I had intermediate classes or beginner classes and advanced classes. And sure, we had some cross training, but I had to separate the newbies from the guys who've been with me for 10 years.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you kind of have to do that, right? And I actually had techniques for quenching the thirst of the inquisitive people. You know the guy that comes in, right, and wants to be doing the advanced stuff because he's seen it on the YouTube. So he wants to be able to do that, right? But he cannot put one foot in front of the other. All right? So I had strategies for dealing with him that would reinforce on him the idea that, well, no, you got to do the basics first. Right? And we never had to do the belt thing. Never. That's not true. We did. Yeah. We did the belt thing for Little Dragons. but they were 4, 5, and 6 years old. At age 7, done. No more belt
Yeah.
stuff, you know? So Sule Welch in Georgia, Sule wanted to know about the epiphany that that caused you to make the switch from like pure martial arts into the self-defense strategies.
So I'll have to get into a little bit of a personal story, but I'll keep it short for you guys so you can understand it.
Okay.
On one part of it, I think all martial arts come with 3 different aspects, and I've always seen it this way. 1 is the artistic expression, 2 is the training methodology, number 3 is the combative application.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guess which one appealed to me the most?
But see, you're an interesting guy, because when you were doing the northern and southern gung fu, you appreciated the historical aspects of it. But you're not a sentimental, romantic type of guy.
No.
Right. So I'm at a loss.
No, I appreciate that stuff. I think I appreciate it more in hindsight. And I felt at the time that it was better than what I was doing when I came out of the taekwondos and the Shotokan karates and the aikidos, because it wasn't so rigid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it looked a lot more fluid to me. We moved a lot, you know, the forms and stuff, forget about that part of it. Everything had like mobility and so I like that flowy, that fluidity to the movement.
Uh-huh.
So part of the reason why I like the boxing, kickboxing stuff, because that brought purpose to the movement. We get to hit stuff in people, and 1 inch matters. That's the difference between getting your nose, you know, crushed in or not.
Right.
And so the combative aspect is really what I was really looking for my entire life. Now, to go into the personal side of things, I told you as an adolescent, my family moved over from one town to another town. And so we went from a very eclectic town. There was a lot of everything: Asians, Indians, African Americans, you know, everything. It was just there was no shortage of any type of a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved to a very homogenous town, which was of 760 people total. I stuck out like a raisin in a bowl of rice, and that brought a lot of problems to me in the racial divide. Martial arts really honestly saved my life. We could talk about that later on too, but and I'm not talking like getting in fights with other people, but I knew that I needed something, that I needed to defend myself, to be able to protect myself at all points in time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the combative aspect really made sense. I still teach the totality of everything because, you know, when a student comes to me, I have to identify their needs, and that need's going to change every 6 minutes. And so they might come into me and say, hey, look, I want to lose a little bit of weight. I want to have some fun. You know, a month later, they're like, oh, I'm getting my, you know, tail beat at, you know, coming outside of work in the parking lot. So now I need some more. It's not my job to tell them what they need. It's my job to be able to provide answers for what they need and identify what that need really is. Okay. And so, and you know that as an instructor, so like, you know, and that's a very fluid and dynamic thing. And so I try and teach in a totality, and I'm really honest about stuff. I say, look, this is more of a combative application, or this is a little bit of an artistic expression, or hey, this is a training methodology. They all have some bleed over and some crossover for sure, but some things are just something. They're just, you know, signatory to what they are. Yeah. And so the combative aspect is really what appealed to me, which is why I loved my decade and some change under Sifu Paul Vunak, because that's all we did. There was no artistic expression. We hit people, we hit stuff all the time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the guys at Valor Jeet Kune want to know how to attract new students who are not familiar with what JKD is, but understand it once you mention the name Bruce Lee, because they think they're going to learn theatrical JKD.
Liberate yourself from the name JKD first.
Yeah, watch the broadcast.
JKD's, yeah. And what I mean by that is this, and that's a great question, right? When I started to teach and I had my own academy and I was telling people I teach JKD, if I take a population, an entire demographic of 10 miles around that radius, 10% of those people might be interested in martial arts. Okay, 10% of that might actually end up at my academy, and only 1% of that actually knows what JKD actually is. So I'm trying to give them language that they don't even understand.
Right.
And so it's more important to appeal to their senses and what they understand in their vernacular, and later on interject the whole JKD terms. Okay, give you an example. So when I was teaching a whole bunch of classes at one point, and they were all self-defense classes. That's all I called it, self-defense, basics of self-defense.
Yeah.
And so in the classes were filling up one after another, and they'd say, hey, eventually they're like, is this like Krav Maga or what is this? And then I'd say, no, it's combative applications from JKD. What's JKD? Well, JKD was a philosophy that came from Bruce Lee, and then I give them the historical part of it. So I put the name JKD last. I never put it first, ever. You know what I mean? And it wasn't because I wasn't proud of it. It was because I knew that the end user wasn't understanding it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? If you want to appeal to people, like if I said, hey, Sifu Dwight, I have this vessel that'll transport you from A to B, and and it costs extra money, and it costs insurance and that kind of thing, but it'll get you from A to B in a relatively efficient manner. Well, we're talking in language. If I just said, hey, Sifu Dwight, I'm gonna sell you a car.
Right.
The car makes sense. That's something you can relate to.
Yeah.
And so, in today's day and age, you turn on the news, you see the more and more need for self-defense in the first place. And so you bring them in under a different balloon and don't put JKD up front. Now, mind you, we talked about messaging in our marketing pieces briefly. And so when you're marketing, you have to kind of do a little bit of a juggling act. Your marketing piece for women is not going to be the same for men. And even amongst those, it's not going to be the same in different ages. And it's not going to be the same for people who have self-defense needs. We have to identify that and market to them in a self-defense manner. People who might have more of a JKD or just martial art based mindset, we have to market that piece to them and put vernacular into that's inclusive to them.
That's interesting, because that's not the approach I used at all. Not at all. Right.
I'm not mad at you for that.
Yeah, no, my approach. See, but here's the thing, because I would listen to stories like what you just told, and maybe it's the water in Miami, right? But I never had those problems. And maybe it's because I had been around for a long time. I used to have a Yellow Pages ad. Right?
These guys don't even know what Yellow Pages is.
I used to have a Yellow Pages ad in the phone book, right? Not an online Yellow Pages ad. Yeah, right? As a matter of fact, I think that unifiedmartialart.com, I'll tell you something funny about that. Idiot me. When I registered that domain, I never thought of registering also unifiedmartialarts.com, because grammatically that's incorrect. You cannot be unified and plural. So I never bothered to pick that one up, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But see, throughout my career, my school ownership career, a huge percentage of the people who came to me came looking for Jeet Kune, came because of my association with Dan Inosanto, and through Dan Inosanto, my association with Bruce Lee. Maybe I was just lucky. And then
no, it was your era.
Yeah, okay. And then when the parents brought the little ones might not know who Bruce Lee was, but I could use the fact that their parents knew who Bruce Lee was to impress and sell it to the kid.
Agreed.
So
but that was an era. And now I think that was an era. It was the 1980s. Guru Dan's name was like really just coming through the ranks like nobody's business. It shined everywhere. There's very few people who come with the qualifications that you came with. You already started to have a reputation as being Sifu Dwight. What was it, JKD? I don't think you had adopted the JKD Rebel thing yet, but you should have. And so I think it was the era. Now you're competing against something else. Look, none of us are going to outmarket UFC. People understand jiu-jitsu. People understand Muay Thai. People understand MMA. Those are terms that's like, like Kleenex,
Yeah.
And so we don't say nasal tissue. We say Kleenex.
Yeah.
And so, I just think that like in that that's a big part. That's actually in my book too, that you have to
Yeah.
communicate for the ages. If I took out a Yellow Pages ad right now, I'd get nobody. I advertise through Facebook ads, Instagram,
Right.
LinkedIn. I have to use today's technology, today's methodology. It's relevant.
Yeah. But here's
You know?
here's how I would make it relevant. Somebody says to me, how do I make Jeet Kune relevant for in light of the UFC and MMA? Well, my initials are DW. There's another guy with the same initials as me, right, who announced that Bruce Lee is the father of MMA. And that's how I would use it. That's how I make it relevant. You see, it's the same way that somebody says to me about, oh, Filipino this and whatever. I can use another initial thing and make it relevant, because everybody has seen Denzel Washington in Book of Eli. So I have all these strategies for drawing connections and keeping Jeet Kune relevant, because that's my life. That's my livelihood. So I study ways to do that. You see, without breaking any kind of rules.
No, and I think that's 100% right. But the problem with it is that's not an elevator pitch. You have to have a conversation with somebody to have that. You can't put that on a grassroots marketing flyer and stick it out there and be like, well, there's another guy who had DW initials who said JKD was the founding, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so we have to have a conversation. Yeah. I'll give you a quick 30-second preview of this. My very first marketing piece, I used to take colored paper, like binds of colored paper that you buy at the store. Mm-hmm. I used to take colored paper because it stuck out, and I would make up a flyer in Microsoft Publisher, because that's the software that we used to use in those days, and I would put it quarter page size, so that way I can get 4 out of 1 piece of paper. Right. Okay, because that's, and I would have Kinko's cut those in the quadrants, and then I would have from a 200 bind paper thing, I'd have 800 pieces of flyer. Mm-hmm. And so my very first flyer, keep in mind my first academy was ballistic fighting methods. Yeah. And I said the same stuff. And I said, Bruce Lee's JKD, taught to the Navy SEALs, edge weapons, impact weapons, firearms training. Yeah. And then at the bottom of it said Zumba and fitness classes, because I wanted to attract the women clientele too, right? Right. I got no women clientele except for 2, okay, and I think they were nuts. Mm-hmm. And so they came to me to they're like, hey, we just want to check your place out, but we looked at the website, it scared the living crap out of us. Then we looked at your flyer and it said ballistic fighting methods. And then we wanted to jump in for Zumba, but you got all this other crazy stuff happening, so we were really scared about coming over here. Yeah. The point is, I sent the wrong message to them. Yeah. You know what I mean? They looked at this thing, and I thought I was being thrifty by being so inclusive of everything that we do. Right. And really what I did was I turned off probably more people than I turned on. Well, yeah. I mean, I learned from Dan Kennedy that you've got to have specific marketing for specific groups. So, so we had unifiedmartialart.com, right? Yep. We had MiamiFitnessKickboxing.com. Yep. Same address, right? But definitely 2 completely separate. Different look. Yeah. Miami Muay Thai, separate website. So everything was a separate school. It was only when you got there you realized that it was one location that had all these programs, but everything was separate. So that's what I had said when Valor JKD asked the question. I said, you have to make your marketing piece message to the right people. You have to understand who that's going out to. Yeah. So maybe somebody that he's talking to who needs to hear the term JKD or Kali or whatever, and somebody else needs to hear, self-defense or whatever. You know what I mean? So you have to identify. Look, the whole name of the game is understanding the end user. If you don't understand the end user, who cares? Look, if I saw a flyer that said, I'm going to show you how to kill somebody with a pencil 121 ways in 2 hours, I'm signing up for that. Most people aren't that stupid to sign up for that. You know what I mean? Right. And so, what you like is not exactly what they like. So understand the end user and speak to them in their language. Yeah. That's so critical. Yeah, but so how would you help somebody who thinks they're smarter than everybody else, right? I'd show them their checkbook. Yeah, I know, because look, that's why I never made a thing from the consulting side of things, only because so I worked with about a dozen or dozen and a half academies, and I realized a couple things. One, at least 25% of people are smarter and can do this better, right? And then I say, okay, how many students do you have? How much income are you bringing in?
Mhm.
Oh, zero? Let's try this again.
Yeah.
Your IQ didn't help you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other part of it was is like it's so like I don't want to charge people for the time, but my time is my time.
Hmm.
I'd much rather do stuff like this, have these kinds of conversations, or write a book and be like, listen, I want you guys successful. You know what I mean? Like, but you need to put the work in. I can only give you the framework. You know, it's your job to work it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's kind of a big part of it. But yeah, for the people who are like, hey, I'm smarter than you are, or whatever else, cool.
Yeah.
How's that working out for you?
Right. Sully asked again, what's the, let me get it right. What's the ideal demographic for a commercial Jeet Kune school?
The ideal demographic. It again, that depends. Is your school built on? Let me back. Sully, pay attention to this. This is gonna really help you a lot. In the grand scheme of things, a martial arts academy typically has two types of way to go about business. You can build a volume game. A volume game meaning I have something for everybody. I got a kids program, I got a fitness program, I got a fighting program, I got everything, and that's a volume game.
Mm-hmm.
While on the other end of the fence, you have an exclusivity game. Basically, you have to look at it like a Ford versus a Ferrari. Ford has a car for everyone. Ferrari has a car for someone.
Mm-hmm.
I followed the exclusivity model, right? So I can take people out of who I want in my academy. The volume game is just like, I just need to put numbers and pump numbers and pump numbers. And so when you're saying what's the ideal demographic for a kids program, or ideal demographic for a fitness program, or ideal demographic for a JKD program, well, like what, you know what I mean? There's you have to look and see, identify each program, what you're trying to get after, and what the grand dynamic of your academy is.
Huh.
You know?
What do you think of the idea of having that exclusivity within the general demographic, so that you have the programs, but then you have an exclusivity program?
I think it's a great idea
within all your programs.
I think it's a great idea because you might have a certain class that's only for X people. So that becomes a motivator, that becomes a moneymaker, right? Now, because you can upcharge for that and cross-sell. Yeah. I am a firm believer that you should have enough bodies in your academy that you can cross-sell, upsell, downsell inside and never need the outside world if you don't need to. And so I like that idea. Be careful with that because branding matters. And so, you know, when you're building the brand for your thing, for your business, do you want to be a Ford that has a GT 500, or do you want to be a Ferrari and all of it's just, you know what I mean? And so, you know, like you can do it either which way. I'm cool with that. But it's going to depend on the dynamic of how you're going to go about business. And keep in mind, the more exclusive it is, typically the more involved you have to be.
Well, yeah. See,
so it's a time consumption.
Because back in the day, I watched what John Graydon was teaching about business. And then I watched what Stephen Oliver was teaching about business and what have you. And I go, oh, I can do that. But what I didn't do, I understood and I actually implemented the mechanics of it all, but I never had a black belt club, right? And then I didn't even call it a black sash club, because that's not Jeet Kune terminology. It was important to me to maintain the Jeet Kune terminology. So I modified the terms, but used the same marketing. Because remember, they used to say that that you wanted to have the general classes because the general classes would give you the income to spend time with the people that you really wanted to spend time with, the hardcore martial artists, right? And for those guys, the hardcore martial artists were in maybe their black belt club, but definitely in their master's club.
Yeah.
So I absorbed what was useful about that idea, but
it's a great idea.
Specifically, so there was different terminology and what have you for the way that we did it.
Zero problem with that. I like, again, I think that's a if you want to, you know, there's a guy named Mike Massey who has a book called Small Dojo Big Profits.
He's the best.
he talks a lot about this thing about how to upgrade and upsell
Yeah.
within your own within the confines of your own school.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I got some stuff that I can disagree with him on, but overall, he's got a really good idea. And I think this isn't news. Lloyd Irving had it, Stephen Oliver had it. Like a bunch of these people had that exclusive club, right?
Right.
And so I'm 100% for it if you have a generalized. See, I was lucky. I started my academy as an exclusive thing from the first place, mostly because I never wanted to own an academy. That wasn't my goal. My end game was to never own an academy, but I needed it as a stepping stone for where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And so I gave myself 10 years of academy ownership, 10 years to the date. I was like, I'm out. And I moved from Chicago down to Texas.
Yeah.
No joke. Yeah. And so, you know, for a lot of other people, it's the opposite because they have a volume type of a game, and that's cool. And if you want to put some exclusivity into it, like you did, like a master's club or a black belt club or whatever kind of a club that people are doing, I think that's a wonderful idea to upsell within your own walls, and you'll have a 8 to 12% increase in income.
Because you know what pissed me off. One of the things that pissed me off, like I watched like the successful type schools, right? And do you know what was in their black belt club? Filipinos.
Same stuff that was in there. Oh yeah, I remember somebody else said that before too.
Yeah, that annoyed the heck out of me.
Right. Did they teach you Shotokan JKD?
You know, so I used to look at all that stuff and I go, God damn, these people take my stuff. Even John Graydon in I think it was 1995, when John Graydon announced cardio karate. And here's what they were going to do. They were going to wear t-shirts, not gis. They were going to wear t-shirts, right? They were going to play music.
We've been doing that from day one.
Right? And I'm going, the Taekwondo people are coming in to steal my stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, like, so you and I had a long conversation about like a year and a half, 2 years ago before the show started. And you said what kind of like motivational speakers or business speakers I listened to. And I said, I kind of listened to Gary Vee a little bit. Yeah. And I love the way he says it. He's like, so what? You had a great idea. What'd you do with it? I mean, if you didn't do anything with it, it's like you're lost. And so, like I don't want to pick
even that. Okay, so let's talk about the application, right? Let's talk about the application of Jeet Kune philosophy in other areas.
Yeah.
Right,
certainly affects almost every aspect of my life.
Okay, hold on.
I'm here.
This is the grief.
You got a little fuzzy there too.
Are you back yet?
Yeah. I'm here. I never left.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, I can hear you. But you're frozen.
Okay, great.
Okay. Wave your hand so I know you're not frozen. Okay. All right. I think we're back.
Okay.
All right. That's enough. Okay. So Jeet Kune philosophy in other areas, because what you just said about having a good idea, what did you do with it? Bruce Lee had good ideas about how to approach martial art training, and he did something with it.
Yeah.
And 45 something years later, you and I are talking about.
Still have it.
Yes.
That's right.
Right? So give me examples of the application of Jeet Kune philosophy in non-martial art settings, non-martial art situations.
I intercept almost everything. Intercepting itself as a martial art tactic is kind of almost advanced, right? Because you have to be able to read. You have to read body language. You have to read intention. You have to read energy. You have to do a calculation in your head as far as timing, distancing, and all this stuff, right? So basically, you have to have some foresight, something that you can count on, not just a blank prediction. And so, You know, we do that in our relationships. We do that in business. We do that in marketing. We do that everywhere.
Right.
So I intercept a lot because I try not to think, you know, some folks can't see 6 inches past their face. I can't see 6 inches here. I have to look at the really long game.
Uh-huh.
So I look like 5 years back. I'm a reverse engineering kind of a guy.
Uh-huh.
When I reverse engineer, I kind of make a plan of how things should have gone, and then I branch off of that and be like, how many problems should I, like, what kind of problems should I face at this stage or that stage? And I try and be early to solve that problem early on.
Yeah.
And so essentially what I'm doing is I'm reading body language and intention ahead, and I'm intercepting that. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I wrote an article many years.
I intercepted you.
Huh?
I intercepted you.
You do that all the time.
I said, New Year's coming. I'm gonna be the first one on this JKD dialogue. I'm gonna tag. No joke. I said I'm gonna tag. I was writing that first post a couple days ago. I'm like, I'm gonna tag Sifu Dwight in this thing. I'm gonna intercept it and refresh his memory because I knew. Because like, yes, I intercepted you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? I wrote an article many years ago about the five methods of defense in interpersonal relationships. Yeah. You know.
Look, I think when we talk about these things, it's about predictability and avoiding confrontation in any aspect. Where do we not do that? We do that on the road. We do that in business. We do that at home. We do that with friendships. We do that with anything and everything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I think another concept that I constantly use is, you know, in JKD, we adapt a lot. We're fluid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so your game plan is a game plan, but, you know, like it doesn't ever stay as your game plan. You have to adapt to what's going on instantly, because you're trying to get yourself in a position to be able to intercept or get on the offense.
Right.
I'm not a defense player. I don't play defense well, you know, and so that's another concept that JKD really has for me, because everything that I do is I'm hitting, I'm moving forward. I have forward progression and everything. Yeah. And so, you know, I do that in business aspect. I do that in relationships. I do that in friendships. I do that everywhere. You know.
Tell me about something, a major realization, something that you had been taught that you were sure it worked, and then you discovered that it actually did not work. Have you ever had that experience?
In martial arts in specific?
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Well, I'll go one step further. I also realized that it wasn't it that didn't work. It was me that didn't work.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Explain.
I realized that almost everything would work at the right time under the right circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And so my application of that thing, let's just say, like, I'll tell you what, I'm horrible at like judo style throwing. I'm just crappy at it. Mm-hmm. And so I enter really well. I can finish fights, you know, in the close range really well. I trap really well, but that whole throwing part really sucked. However, I've learned a whole lot of Aikido and Judo style throwing over my career. And one thing I realized was nobody holds their punch out this way for me to be able to grab their wrist, turn their up, you know what I mean, and do these types of things and make a manipulation.
Right.
I'm doing 5 motions to that person's 1 motion. The math is off.
Yeah.
And so I learned that early on. That's part of the reason why I wanted to step away from the traditional arts and the Kung Fu style arts. And that's why I got into boxing. I realized a lot of that stuff because, I've learned this trapping and different types of things, and I step in the boxing ring with the boxer, and I'm like, I'm gonna pox out and lops out this guy, and next thing you know, I got birds tripping over my head because he, like a middleweight, dude just drilled me into the ropes. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh crap, where's his hands? There's nothing for me to do that with. Yeah. And so I realized real quick that what. I'm forcing myself to do something. I feel like there's some real genius with how Bruce Lee said it in Enter the Dragon. He said, I don't hit. It hits by itself. That means it's instinctual. It's educated enough that it's automatic and it happens. Yeah. And so when I want to do something, it never works. When it just kind of naturally comes out, it always works.
All right. Okay. So let's start to wind this up with Nik Farooqi specific definitions of specific words. Yes. Nik Farooqi definition for skill. Break it down.
The accumulation, practice, and reapplication of any action.
Okay. Technique.
Technique is the linear sequence of how one thing should be performed.
Okay. Attribute.
It's the relational topics related to any technique to functionalize that particular technique.
Okay. And
timing, distancing, line familiarization.
Right. Just so you guys know, I didn't prep him for this. Okay.
No, we're speed dating right now.
Okay. Ranges of combat.
Some people say with 4, some people say with 5. I don't really care with which one. Some people will say there's the kicking range, the striking range, the standing grappling range, and then the ground range. Other people will separate that and they'll say kicking, kickboxing range, trapping range, standing grappling, clinch range, ground fighting, and weapons, which is typically the way I teach it.
Okay. And what was your reason for moving away from the, let's call it the traditional or the standard definition of ranges of combat?
I was taught the 5 ranges before I was taught the 4 ranges. And so that was vernacular that worked for me because keep in mind, I come from the JKD concepts, right? Like what we refer to as concept side. And so there's a heavy influence in the edge weapon and the stick. So we saw the Kali side of things, and to be inclusive of that and firearms and all these other things, I realized that was, you know what I mean? Like, so I just included that into it, and then I have subsets in each of those.
So what do you say to somebody who says to you, yeah, but Bruce didn't do Kali?
I say you've not watched the movies thoroughly.
People who are like Bruce Lee's best friends, so they're on a first name basis with him, right? So Bruce didn't do Kali. What do you say?
I'd say turn on the videos and watch him do a Sinawali pattern with the double stick. Watch him use the staff. You know what I'm talking about, the cave scene.
Yeah.
It's right behind you. You know? Yeah.
Hey, you know, sometimes people ask me about the Bob Marley stuff behind me. And what I do is I send them, I have 3 pictures of Bob Marley, right? Yeah. The caption is Bob in his daily Kung Fu lesson. Seriously.
Okay.
I got 3 pictures.
You know, some people, I have to ask, and this might be a great question for you because your experience obviously supersedes mine when it comes to the JKD and the Conley side of things. When I think about JKD to me was very much a filter. It didn't teach me things; it taught me how to look at things. And so when I historically read about Sifu Bruce Lee and his journey through martial arts and the Wing Chun side of things, and the different eras he was doing different things, and I listen to stories from Guru Dan when he comes in town. I always, the one thing that always kind of tugs at my heart as far as how Bruce Lee was training was constant absorption, constant research. So you can never say he did one thing or did another thing. And on top of that, the one foundation, I think the fundamental in JKD is that the art is not as important as the artist. And so make this yours. I don't move like Bruce Lee, but I'm not 5'5", 135 pounds. Right. Yeah. So maybe you should say Bruce Lee doesn't move like Nick.
We could say that.
But an educated JKD person can look and be like, Nick's intercepting, look at Nick's timing, look at Nick's base. You mean? And so like if I moved, you'd say Nick's JKD's this. Right. You know what I mean? And so, but to the uneducated guy, they're like, well, shit, you don't look like Bruce Lee. And it's like, well, I'm not Asian.
Well, somebody asked me that on Quora one time. How come Jeet Kune is not used in MMA? So my answer was, okay, so let me ask you this. In MMA, do they block and hit? Do they simultaneously parry and hit? Do they evade and hit? Do they use distance? And do they use interception? All right. So
good.
Right there.
Send that guy an invoice for giving him a lesson like that.
All right. So I'm making sure that I got all my notes here. We did talk about the book that you're kind of working on and not working on. Right.
Right. Aside from the book, I got some big plans for 2019. One of the things that I'm releasing is what I call the 52-week JKD trainer. It's an online course. every week unlocks new lessons, and it's in a progressive manner, how I would teach in my academy for a 1-year student, you know, and it comes to the workbook, a training manual. So that's like one of my big projects that's away from S2 strategic defense, because I want to get back to a little bit of JKD and Kali in my life. I really miss that
Of course
aspect
you
of
miss
things.
it.
Huh?
Of course you miss it.
Yeah, I do, man.
Yeah.
It's such a big part of who we are.
Right.
And so more importantly, I love recently the conversations I've been having with people, but via phone or via, you know, instant messenger, about hearing their goals, and then hopefully being able to provide something that not is a, this is how you do it, more like, let's have a conversation and culminate some thought.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll help you move one step closer to your success, as a martial arts school owner, because I feel a martial arts academy is a pinnacle in the community, and we have to preserve that. It's a fragile thing, but we stand for so many things. We influence so many people in so many different ways, you know. And so, to me, it's really it's a different version of a church or synagogue or a mosque or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
We're you know, and so I really want to make sure that we're not losing to the iPad, and we're not losing to, you know, Facebook and Instagram and that kind of stuff.
Right.
People need what we have. They just don't know how much they need it.
No, I mean, that's brilliant, because remember how we decided beforehand we wouldn't talk about family, we wouldn't talk about politics, and we wouldn't talk about religion. But like you just said, right, the martial arts school has all of that in it, right?
Yep.
The martial arts school also has the academics side of it, and it's got the psychological aspect of it, because a lot of people do not realize when you run a martial arts school, you better have a degree in psychology, right? So,
and a lot of Kleenex.
Yeah. Okay. Best place for people to reach out to you. Anybody who is, I'll use a political word, triggered in a good way by what you've said. Right?
I hope that everybody's. I hope that I provided some value to whoever's watching this now and a replay. I'll give you guys all of my pit stops. My website is www.s2strategic.com. On there's a contact form. If you need to email me from there, feel free. My Facebook for the business, just do a search for S2 Strategic Defense. If you want to find me on a personal level, just do a search for Sifu Nik, and Nik is spelled N-I-K. So just do a search for Sifu Nik, and I'll pop up over there, and you can find Sifu Dwight. Him and I are friends on there too, and it'll pop up as people you may know, kind of thing. And send me a friend request or any of that stuff, or shoot me a quick instant messenger or whatever. Instagram, I'm at S2 Strategic. So you can pretty much find me anywhere. I'm around. I make myself available.
Are you on the Twitter?
I have a Twitter account, but I haven't logged into it for so long, because I feel like Twitter has become a political porno.
Yeah.
And so, although, look, we all have our beliefs, I don't want to contend with anybody without merit. And so, you know, you might be on one side of the political aisle, I might be on the other side of the political aisle, but we can have a conversation and come out better. I don't need to hide behind a keyboard. I'll do my dirty work up front.
I mean, when I didn't get interested in politics until this last election cycle, and it's only because, to me, it reflected what has gone on in Jeet Kune also. Everybody's got the same goal, right, which is to help other people, but they've got these completely different ideas as to what constitutes the approach that should be used,
how to get there,
to help. So to me, it was the same thing. All right.
It's polarizing. And so let's just go back to the things that we know. We know how to punch, we know how to kick, we know how to trap, we know how to bang sticks around. And that kind of thing.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you can think of?
No, that's pretty good. Hopefully I provide some value for you, for your audience. And it's always an honor to spend time and chit chat with you. My plan is still to make it out to Miami in sometime January. And, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come up here and hang out with you guys. Uh-oh, you froze
right
up.
at the end.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. Okay, that's
right at the end.
That's a sign for us to sign off. All right?
Yep.
Take care, brother. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
All right. Now, wasn't that fun? Aren't you guys happy that the technology gods smiled on us? All right, so that was Sifu Nik Farooqi on episode number 42 of the Jeet Kune Dialogues. I told you guys if you came on early, next Friday we'll be with Billy Jack Rooks. That's going to be another fantastic Jeet Kune Dialogues. Next Wednesday we'll be back with the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast. What's the news? jkdrebel.com. Go there, check out the website, go to the store, purchase something from the store. All the proceeds from that stuff goes to enhancing the quality of what it is that we're doing, both on the broadcast and the dialogue. So show your support. Sign up for notifications for when we go live on Facebook and the YouTube, and any of the past episodes of both the broadcast and the Jeet Kune Dialogues, you can find them on their specific channels on the YouTube. All right, that's it. Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, signing off. You guys have a good one. Well, I'll see you next time. Take care.